we're going to show the film first, and then the artists who put the film together are all going to come up and talk about it. There'll be lots of opportunities for questions. And so I'd like to just introduce John Torres here. John used to work here at MIAC as curator of archaeology. He now works with SWAIA, very involved with the artists in Indian markets, so he does a great job. And of course, we just had Indian market, very successful one. John you were the videographer, I understand, on this film.
Technical thing.
Right, and then we have Mateo Romero, painter, who also stars in the film. We have Diego Romero, his brother, wonderful potter who's a star, and Marcus Ammerman, who has a role in this film too. And I think you're just going to love this movie. If you haven't seen it, it's down in our exhibition at River Apart. But this is going to be a wonderful opportunity to also hear from the artists. So we'll go ahead and start the film, and I think John's got an introduction for you. Thank you very much.
That's a picture of us, yeah.
Okay, was that about the same time we did this, or earlier?
That predated this. That was sort of a template for this.
Love it.
Yeah, that was an earlier session where we went out into the arroyo. She's talking, there's a painting at SAR in the boardroom, School of Advanced Research, in Garcia. And you could, if you have time, go away and look at it. It's Diego and I dressed as archaeologists, and we're digging up pots. And it's actually was shot maybe about 10 years ago.
Maybe. I was going to say, actually, the film was never supposed to be the center point of the show. The film was just supposed to be a prop for an installation piece that me and Mateo thought it was going to create a fictional Pueblo and make a fictional pottery style and kind of do a critique of archaeology in the 1800s, early 1900s. And so we started the show and we started to do it, and we thought, I remember I had been watching the Shackleton, the HMS Victory, or on the History Channel the night before. And then I was telling Mateo the next day, I think it would be interesting to actually film them excavating the Pueblo, like in the Shackleton. Yeah, in this black and white kind of grainy, real rough, kind of way. And add a little bit of Charlie Chaplin kind of to it. Make a short black and white film of them excavating this thing. Well, what happened was the film actually became more of the project than the actual installation. The installation became a prop of the film at some point, I would say. And the film kind of took off and developed into the most interesting thing about the whole project. And I don't know about you, but me and Mateo had never made a film before, so it was just kind of a learning experience, And one thing that fascinated me about it is how props become real in that sense when they're on film. All that stuff was just silly make-believe pottery from jackalopes and Halloween store and dress-up beards. But they kind of, when you put them on film and you're removed from it, I found it fascinating how it actually translates as kind of real in the sense that it's just a symbol of what it's supposed to be. But when it's on film or in that context, it seems believable. Yes.
You're not looking at a real skull, but it seems like it kind of. It's believable as a stand-in for a skull. But to answer your question, there was an earlier painting. The painting was shot behind Roxanne Swensel's house in the canyons of the Santa Clara, and it was with her horse, Toucha, and me and Diego sort of did this archaeologist kind of thing. We buried pots up and dug them up. I had Roxanne took frames of it, took shots of it, and then I translated them into painting. And in the painting, it's basically Diego and I with a horse in the background. We're kind of pulling pots out of the ground. And then there's a kind of sequence of things around the edge of the painting, which are pots that the pot hunters are sort of dreaming about. They're kind of, in their minds, are sort of fantasizing about what they're looking for and what they pull out of the ground. And the other thing which I did was I took little pieces of parchment and I wrote these little field notes in, and into kind of a quill, like an ink quill pen. And I made them sort of like the bandolier field notes. They had a kind of reference to that. And they weren't. I mean, they were actually my own notations. They were notes about skull measurements, like phrenology, and kind of the measurements of early native skulls using calipers. There were measurements about, there was notes about how the Indian pack bearers were kind of lazy and shiftless and kind of ethnographically, racially disparaging notes. And so I posted those around on the edge of the piece too. And then people would actually come up and read them. And some of them were actually archaeologists. Like they were like people like from the community here. And they would look at these. And I was in my booth in Market about 10 years ago when this piece was in my booth. And people would say things like Kenneth Chapman, for instance, was there. And he was talking to somebody. He goes, these are actually the field notes from Vandalay. And I was just kind of laughing. I was actually scanning with Roxanne Swenson at the time, and I started giggling because I'd written all these goofy little notes in on skull measurements, little sketches of postures. So it started out as a kind of humorous sort of look at
the crowbar approach, Dan.
Yeah, well, every scene we shot in there comes out of a historic film. I mean, even down to the last scene, it's sort of a thing of what's his name from down in Zuni.
Cushing.
Cushing, yeah. Well, actually, after saying he wasn't going to publish anything, he does, and then he dies mysteriously choking on a fishbone or something.
Well, Marcus also had a kind of idea about the end, which was that it would have a kind of feel about like the Tut excavations,
Right.
where after they excavate the tombs, like these foul like deaths, they all meet like these weird circumstances. It also has a kind of Chaplin feel. It also has some references to Murnau, Nosferatu.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Murnau's an early German expressionist filmmaker, black and white. He does the first vampire movie. He does Nosferatu. I don't know if you guys have seen Murnau's Nosferatu.
I remember
But
that.
you should go see it. Yeah, it's German expressionist film. It's it's a hand crank, black and white.
Well,
So it's got a pulsing kind of feel to it because it's all hand done, and it has the iris in, iris out kind of stuff. And it's got little subtitles on it. And overexposed too. It's really blown out. It's got scenes of castles where they're just black lines against the sky. It's got this kind of vampire guy with long fingers.
Well, I remember one scene in the movie in a movie made on it, he tells him, he says, what I should have done is put the camera in fast motion and then slowed it down so everything would have a surreal look to it. He goes, esoteric views. And then I was telling Mateo the next thing, we should shoot this scene in reverse just to see how it looks. Just like, let's start when they're walking the pots into the basement. We actually started at the end of it, but you'd never know. It looks like we're coming in through the door and going, but that was actually, we started at the beginning. So anyway, we just had fun. At a certain point, it just became a way to let off steam after any market.
Yeah, and there's in the galleries in that weird little space back there. It's like, what do we do? What do we do? And then they said, well, let's do an installation piece. So it started off, we were going to recreate the lab from 1920 or whatever. And so then it's like, well, we need props for that. And then, well, let's do this film, use the props, and then it kind of came to something.
We're gonna put a skeleton in the closet downstairs. And they're gonna let us. They were vetoed.
No, it was a choice. We decided not to. There were some people that.
You guys decided.
Yeah, I guess there were some people that felt it
Cochiti.
was just a little too much
Yeah.
to put a cadaver in it. So, but there's actually like one thing that me and my brother have always tried to adhere to is there's paradigms of what you do and don't do within the Pueblo, and as an artist, they kind of expect you to adhere to that. So when some of the people kind of ask me, Mateo, hey, pushing, we don't think that would be appropriate. I'm always the first to say that's fine. I actually think in that sense, it's actually made me as an artist more creative, rather than literally painting a clown or a masked figure or using a skeleton. You have to find ways to get your message across that work and at the same way, but aren't the subject. Don't use the imagery that they ask you not to. So I think in a sense, it's actually forced me to be more creative and more in my own art experience to look at alternatives to get my message across that are so I guess alternatives, let's say, to the easy or it's the obvious. How about that?
Can you talk about the things that they prefer you not use? Or
Is what?
can you talk about things they prefer that you not portray?
Yeah, I just kind of did masked figures, religious deities. It was interesting. I do remember at one point I was worried about how are they going to take the Buffalo Man figure, because it is a masked figure. And I think that when some of the older people saw that, the common thing was, it's all right when he was in the suit in the museum, but we weren't too big on the part when he was in the breechcloth. And then I thought, interesting. That's interesting.
He was controversial, yeah. Some older.
But we really wanted to use. It was perfect. Marcus had worked with the Buffalo Man as a character in his own vocabulary, and he fit right in there as the vengeful spirit. Kind of like they awaken this spirit of the Pueblo, and he comes back.
It is a rule.
Yeah.
Which I know is really francais. It's not a rule, it's francais. I don't know, it's a weird bitter thing.
But it was a learning experience. We want to do another one. That's it was a incredibly low budget movie, and but after we did this, there were some people that were interested in funding another one, and we want to try it again. This time with a bigger budget and a little more time, and have some ideas. And basically, what we want to do is like a series of short critiques. I think they don't really have to be long movies, just 10, 15 minutes, 11 minutes, and just like little allegorical, a cautionary tale. That actually came from a Maurice Sendak book, when he, I don't care, said Pierre, so a lion came to call. Get your fingers off the wall. I don't care, said Pierre. So it's fun. It's kind of it was a gas. I really enjoyed making it. I hadn't seen it actually. I have to say that in probably over a year. Yeah. So it's still brought a chuckle.
There is also a kind of serious side about it, which is that Native peoples are very sensitive about their grave sites being disturbed. So even though it's very playful or humorous, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, the real kind of critique is that historically in this area, people have been digging up the ground and pulling out bodies and bones and pots. And there are even stories of people in Santa Fe, like Forrest Fenn, for instance, who would have a private pueblo that he owned. He owned, was it Pueblo Zarro? San Marcos. He owns Pueblo San Marcos. And there's stories of him sort of having people over to barbecue on his Pueblo land. And there's trenches that are cut, and people would sort of dig in the trenches, and they'd find something like a piece of pottery or an arrowhead, and they put it in a pile of interesting objects. They find someone's like finger bone or someone's like jawbone, and they toss it in like this kind of refuse pile of human remains. So there is a very sensitive issue, which is that universally speaking, indigenous people don't want their sites disturbed. They don't want the bodies taken out of the ground. They don't want bones of their ancestors sort of laid out on the ground and the pots kind of moved out.
And the two archaeologists kind of loosely based on A.B. Kidder and Earl Morris, kind of two classic guys who were shooting all this stuff early in the day. And there's actually shots, film footage of them digging a broken flint cave in whatever 1917 or something. And they find all these mummies and they're posing all these silly pictures around the mummies with their arms around them, and then they literally toss them aside and go for the pots. And it's like, wow. So mostly Navajo and some Jemez excavators dug all of Chaco. I mean, they were the laborers that dug all those big sites. And they kind of sat around and stroked their beards. So it's kind of a commentary on that. That's why all the Chaco sites have Navajo names, because they kept asking, well, what do you call this place? Oh, Big Black House, or Big Yellow House.
Yeah, right.
Any questions? No questions?
Just a comment.
Sure.
I think this is so successful, you all should quit your day jobs.
Again?
This is our day job.
I know it was a lot of fun, and I was, I ran camera and I did technical stuff, and then we'd sit down for lunch, and Diego's like, it's Indiana Jones, it's Nosferatu. I'm like, okay, well, it's hand crank. I'm like, okay, let me vary the speed. We shot this on video, and then all that stuff's just filters and stuff afterwards.
John did a wonderful job as a videographer. Diego and I really didn't know how to make our vision kind of happen. We had a script, kind of a loose script of ideas, and we had some themes we wanted to put out there visually, but we had never done this. And John really took the kind of ideas we had and visually kind of put them into a narrative, made it manifest.
Translating what artists really want is what I do now. Trying to understand.
You had a question?
I had a question. How come the horse whinny is the only accurate sound in it? I loved it, and I missed it the first time I saw it.
She just did that.
Yeah, No, it was purely accidental. I was just standing this film, and then she doesn't like people very much. So, and all of a sudden, she just didn't like the camera pointing right at her, so she waited up, and then, well, people are gonna see her jerking around doing something, so it's something.
Well, I love that you left it in.
This was shown last year for the first elementary.
It was actually 2 years, that's when this exhibit opened here in River Park.
Well, yeah, but last year was, a year ago, was the first time films were allowed to be entered into.
Oh, into market, yeah. No, we didn't enter market because I worked for Swire, so. No, it hasn't not been market. We showed it at the Santa Fe Film Festival, and we kind of
They
shopped
thought we were
around a little bit.
racist.
It's Santa Fe.
Yeah, they didn't like us there.
We didn't have any introduction or comment kind of set up for it. So
People walked out, they were mad.
They were mad, they were
No,
furious,
it's a comic, it's a spoof or whatever.
I showed it at the, I think it was 2009 or 2010 American Anthropological Association
right.
meetings. Yeah, I showed it there too, but there, so it was really in context. It's all they deal with.
Yeah, after
So
this film
super
came out, I
interesting.
finally realized, I guess I'm really not going back to archaeology anytime soon. There's some people in town that were really mad.
Sense of humor.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't, laugh at it.
But it seemed like you really captured the essence of the Anglo-archaeologist experience. I'm wondering, have you spent a lot of time around white people? Or studied extensively? Or is it all from books?
Did you go to any of their ceremonies?
Watching a lot of bad anthropology films. So actually, we've gotten most requests from various anthropology departments who want to show it to the class. I think it's hilarious. And we have it up on YouTube. People are still watching it.
What is it, moniker for YouTube?
And search for the Anasazi. All the weird ones that come up with it are more funny. Ours is clearly a parody, and you look at the other ones and go, oh wow, they're really buying this thing. It's a big mystery.
I have another question, sorry.
That's okay.
You went to school for art in California.
UCLA.
Right. Did you bring some of that film, either you studied it or just being exposed to
I
it?
didn't study film. I went to UCLA. I got a master's in design, and I studied with a gentleman called Adrian Sachs, who was then the foremost ceramicist, probably at the top of the pile. What was interesting about it, though, is that Adrian really did believe in intellectually based art and narrative art and cognitive, thought-provoking art. So in order, I remember we used to, and at the time, I didn't quite agree with him. I still really don't, but we fought constantly. But in the end, Adrian said, if you want to get a degree from my program, you're going to have to do something that I consider art. And so I suppose within that sense, narrative and film and kind of having a little agenda of spoofing on, like I said, the general crowbar for me approach to anthropology in the 1900s. So in a sense, I guess that kind of came out of the grad school experience, not the filmmaking or the film, but the ideas of content and narrative and an agenda, I suppose. Even in my own pottery, I'm actually a potter.
Yeah.
And it's this narrative. I read comic books as a kid, and that translates over into the art. And most of the stuff I do is some kind of, even like the Homer head. It's a spoof on pop culture and what we value and as society and popular culture.
It's a painted chia pet.
It's a painted chia pet, yes. It's actually Tony's chia pet. He brought it over one day. I was like, look at this elephant. This is going to be so great. I'm going to paint this because there wasn't elephants in America. I said, it'd just be great. It would be an Anasazi elephant. I mentioned he had this Homer chia pet head. Actually, after that movie, I did the sofa show, and people had seen the chia pet heads, and I showed up at sofa with a whole row of them. One year I had done like a Homer, Bart, Garfield. Garfield, Shrek, yeah, Barack Obama. There's a whole set, like SpongeBob and Bugs Bunny and Hillary Clinton out there, and they actually transcribe really well as little Peruvian spouted vessels. There's a whole tradition of little spouted vessels about that size. So it was fun to just mishmash several kind of pottery traditions, the pre-Columbian, Cochiti kind of design vocabulary with the Chia Pet Walmart pop culture. You know, interesting enough, Chia Pet and Walmart figured that out pretty well. What people I can relate to, Homer and Bart, Garfield, and whatnot.
Doesn't your Chula Rosa black on gold date from the university period?
Yes, it is. It is. There is a piece in there in the lobby that I had done in grad school, and I remember at the critique, Adrian felt it that I was replicating historic objects, and that I needed to have more of a narrative to the work, which led to the conversation, which I explained earlier. It's been a good journey.
Earlier Temple of Doom sequence that had both that vessel and then the Homer head when it was still in its terracotta phase before it was painted, where instead of just stealing the Homer head, you had a choice between the black on gold or the Homer head.
We didn't end up using that same.
Because it wasn't painted yet, so it didn't pop out.
Right.
But it was a nice in joke because Diego was basically choosing between his gold but black pot or the Homer head. He takes the Homer head.
Yeah, we shot that in the little playroom over here.
It actually looks kind of real.
It does. It's black and white and scratchy. Yeah, actually, when I worked for the Navajo Nation as an archaeologist, tribal archaeologist for them, we'd go out on the road and we'd dig all these sites and these communities, and the community members come out and watch what we're doing and stuff. And I finally said to my boss one day, I said, well, we do all this stuff. We take all this stuff, we write it in books, they end up in universities and academic settings all over, but the communities there don't ever know what we learned there. So is there anything we can do, some sort of non-jargony version of what we're doing to kind of give to the local chapters, the local schools, and show them what we dug out of their places? And I said, maybe we can do a short film on it. Maybe that would translate well. And I said, yeah, it's a great idea. Go ahead, do it. So that's how I started as a documentary filmmaker. I shot 5 of those, all shot in Navajo language for those communities. So that was suddenly, oh, I guess I'm a filmmaker now. So I went to community college and learned how to edit. So when this came up, I thought, oh, this would be really fun. I can
Taking culture, taking it out, repackaging it, bringing it back.
That's the question. You as brothers, obviously ended up in 2 different, they're both artistic, but did either one of you start at the same place and one of you went? I mean, did you used to do pots or you used to do painting, or did you always been separated, or was it something you did at home together? Did you do that?
Well, I think we both kind of started as illustrators with Bosch, right?
Yeah, we're comic collectors from way back. We also come from an artist family. It sounds kind of cliche in Santa Fe to say we come from generations but we do actually come from generations of artists. Our grandmother is Teresita Chavez Romero from Cochiti. She's a noted polychrome artist. And our dad was a Dunstable painter, Santo Romero. So I would say we were kind of, surrounded by artists early on. And they didn't even really realize it, but just people around us really valued the artist. They valued the mark making and the hand of the artist. And my brother talks about illustration. We did both go to the same university. It was the Academy of Art College in San Francisco, and we studied sort of design there as illustrators. But before that, even we were comic book collectors. We still do collect comic books. So I think that in some kind of maybe unconscious way, the things around us that were valued, the people that were valued, were Dunstable painters and potters and illustrators and comic book artists, and that there was a kind of value system that was sort of built up in us to that. When we did finally go in directions and sort of launch ourselves on educational tracks and making choices and kind of what you want to do. I think there was kind of artist vibe that sort of permeated our lives. There really wasn't much else was valued in the family, really. I mean,
Sports, football, yeah. Yeah, certainly, it wasn't a situation where someone said, I want to be an artist. Oh, don't do that. There's no money in it. You can't possibly make a career at it.
people were supportive of that. People were like, well, you know, your dad.
This is what you need to do. You need to go to school here and say this. I didn't start pottery until I was 19. I was kind of a latecomer to it. And I picked it up through a lady called Atelier Loma, Institute of American Indian Arts. And it was I guess, a life-changing experience. You know, I went to IAIA thinking I would paint or draw or illustrate, and then I took a pottery class because all the classes were filled and I needed to have my 12 credits or something. And they said, well, you just ought to try this, Diego. Here's traditional pottery. I think you'll really get along with this lady. Just give it a try, see what you think. And I fell in love with it the first time I ever took a pottery class. I was like, whoa, this I could do. I remember making little pots. And she was very encouraging. And I remember even early on, it just felt really natural. I was making little clay coyotes by the end of the time. And I used to sell them at Elaine Horowitz Gallery. She first carried my clay sculpture. And from there, I've been doing it ever since, in one form or another. I wanted to be a traditional potter, but later I kind of, I'm not a traditional potter, I'm more of a contemporary potter, but I think that's more of who I am as an individual, you know, to I know myself to be true. So I went in, so anyway, that's where I wound up. It was doing more contemporary, but it makes more sense being raised in Berkeley and half Anglo and gone to the program at UCLA. And I just wanted to do something a little, I guess, more reflective of my own experience, draw on my own life experience and my interests. I've been doing contemporary pottery ever since I came back here in '93, I think.
Mateo, were you painting before you went to Dartmouth? Were you set up half you were on already?
I was not. I was, you know, sort of an illustrator, a draftsman, and I went to Dartmouth in 1985, and I wanted to be an architect. And they had a really good program where they placed people at Yale for graduate studies in architecture. But when I got there, I fell in love with the drawing courses. I was just drawing all the time in studio art, and I realized that I didn't want to design spaces. I wanted to actually work with figure ground and draw people, paint people. I didn't start actually using color until I was about 20 years old, because I came out of this illustrational background using black and white line and things like that. So it's kind of like the Matisse thing, where I think he's like 18 or 19, he's in a hospital, he starts using watercolor. That's kind of, you know, not that I'm like Matisse exactly. The experience is similar to that. I didn't start using color until I was, you know, well into an experience.
We've been a lot of those early paintings of blood.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't even remember anymore.
That's how I met Mateo. I did a show of his here. And I got hired as curator of archaeology, and all 9 shows I did here were all contemporary art shows.
And when did you add the photographic process?
The photographic process was added about 7 years ago. I was a Dubin Fellow at SAR. That's Ron and Susan Dubin's fellowship portion of it. And I had always wanted to incorporate photography in my work. It has a real pop sensibility. It's kind of referential to Rauschenberg and Warhol, these kind of iconic pop figures in the 60s in New York. But it's also very expensive to do that, if you're using still screen technology, because you have to shoot a screen for each image, it becomes time consuming. The technology doing photo transfer, it wasn't really around, 10 years ago. Nowadays, the technology has become so accelerated that you have to take a photograph of you right now, and I can go to Kinko's and print it, and I can blow it up the size of maybe like half the screen, and it takes me about 10 minutes, and I can take that and make a painting of it, and it's very accessible, it's very direct, it's very inexpensive.
Should we do that after?
Get my camera. But the kind of rapacity of it didn't exist like 10 or 12 years ago. So when I did actually do the Duke Fellowship, I looked around and figured out that it was possible to do it really rapidly and really cheaply. So I started incorporating kind of a mixed media approach to the painting. I mean, if you think about it, we're artists and we use our hands. We kind of come out of tradition of making art, looking at something with your eyes, kind of using your hands to make a mark, to kind of translate that, to kind of gestalt to that, right? Kind of the moment, right? But at the same time, what we did with this film was kind of conceptual. It's a very minimal film, it's very stripped down, it's black and white, there's no words to it. It's very lean in some respects. And so really, as an artist, it's about ideas, right? I mean, it can be about using the hand to make the mark, kind of create something in the world. It can also be as simple as saying, I have an idea for a film, let's make this. So it's just another side of the coin, right? In terms of what we do, what we produce. And I think it's interesting in that it speaks to a kind of, artist concept idea. Artist kind of minimal concept or an idea or sense of humor or sensibility. And I think it's an interesting document, for people that come out of studio art kind of fine art tradition, just to try a kind of conceptual view of art. Art can be anything. It can be an idea, it can be an assemblage on a table, it can be a drawing on the wall. It doesn't have to necessarily be just a drawing. It can be anything it wants to be. Film is actually fascinating. I mean, I'm not a videographer or anything, but there's a kind of speed that this kind of modern age has with all the digital technology and all the information and the ease of kind of making a film and editing it, putting it on YouTube. We do art, and I think really small communities of people come to see the art. They come to a gallery show. You have a small group of collectors will collect a piece. You put it on the website. Maybe a slightly larger audience sees it. But you do a document like this, put it on YouTube, and like 10,000 people look at it, or 80,000 people look at it. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, what's the speed of the communication of this age? How do people really connect with the message? If art can be about a message or an idea, as opposed to how you make it, what's the audience for that? What's the venue for that? It's electronic. It's a digital venue. And so this thing functions in a way. I'm sure that more people have seen this video of ours just on YouTube than have come to 100 artist shows in Santa Fe the whole time, the whole summer. Right? You just click a button, it pops up, and people see it.
So you could get a role as an actor now.
I think I'll be absent in the next film. I'm looking at Marcus as our lead. Marcus is going to be great. Marcus is our guy.
He doesn't know it yet.
When you get your talk in one of these breakfasts, knowing the symbols of Cochiti and being respectful of them, but you use the term, the symbols are your language. And so I find it fascinating that both of you all have played with those representations of ideas in symbols. And then you do this film and you have very little words and text. And I find that to be a emerging thing with all three of you.
A picture's worth a I actually,
Talk about symbols.
I thought it was interesting to try. Well, okay, one thing I've always thought was interesting is how if I watch someone looking at one of the pots that I made, and they're like Japanese or German, and I'll be like in incognito in the background, and I'll see a couple having a dialogue about the piece. And I'll think, this is interesting. These people are, there's not a word or written, or it crosses the language barrier, basically. And I think that, so in that way, it is kind of interesting to try to avoid dialogue, because that creates a language barrier. So it's almost, I guess in a sense, the less language used, the more universal it becomes. And other cultures and other people can read through the language of symbols. One of my classic examples is if you put the broken heart over the guy at the bar, and then people will look at it and say, oh, well, he's at the bar, he has a broken heart. And but then the same people might be German or Japanese or from some other Paris or something, and they can still read it and say, oh, look at the guy's in the bar with a broken heart. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to use symbols and as kind of a universal language. I think that at a certain point, it's like when you look at the men's room, women's room, anybody can read that. You don't have to be raised in the culture to, there's a woman in a dress and a kind of shape for a guy and a wheelchair. So I think it is interesting to kind of approach it as more of a universal, rather than geared specifically towards English-speaking grad students from UNM. So rather than to kind of cross that boundary, and I think interestingly enough, lack of dialogue plays a part in that. We do want to make another movie. We're going to. And I was saying I would want to use a very minimalist approach to dialogue in that too. I think you can really get your message across more so with sometimes less is more. And the more clutter, the more language and more semantics get in there, then it's harder for people to understand. And I think
Plus real actors are expensive. So.
Going back to the digging up nowadays, contemporary, in the Pueblos, what percentage of what comes up is actually used in exhibits and everything, and what percentage of it stays in storage and in labs? And I was just curious how much of it actually comes out, or...
There's actually not that many excavations going on anymore. I mean, when they put a new road in or a new pipeline or something, sometimes they have to get it out of the way. They often will route things around because excavations are so expensive. But when they do, it's, a small handful of whole pots, not within burial context, will make it into a collection, and the other 99.99% ends up in a box in some mass storage facility, waiting for some grad student to come re-dig it up and analyze the whole thing. It just takes a lot of time. So they'll do a simple report saying, okay, this is the time period, this is what kind of structures are there, that kind of stuff, just to meet the basic compliance stuff. But any serious detailed research on that has to come from someone who wants to do it for nothing, basically. But it's, we have one room downstairs that's all pre-Columbian pots, and I don't know, a couple thousand maybe, versus metric tons in this facility down on the airport. I mean, there's broken pots.
Here's a thought. Every time you go into a new convention center, the Santa Fe Convention Center, and you drive down to the second and the third parking levels, they actually exist where historic Tsuke boat existed, right?
Yeah.
So if you go back to the newspaper files about 2 or 3 years ago, you can read about how Tsuke was interacting with the convention center in the city of Santa Fe because of the excavation of bodies and pottery and kivas in that space. So every time I go to the convention center and I park on the second or the third parking floor, I'm always kind of looking around for something because I understand that you're actually physically in the space where historic Tsuke was. And it's fascinating. I mean, I don't know what happened to the objects that were there, but Tsuke probably was involved in a kind of discourse of I imagine reinterring them somewhere else.
They're reinterred in that same spot.
They're reinterred in the same, okay, so,
Yeah.
so not only are you physically in the space where they were, but
Right.
probably they've been,
Yeah.
you're right over where they,
But I mean-
on the third floor, you're right on top of where they've been reinterred.
Yeah, the X, Y coordinates are now in the middle of the parking structure, so they just drop the Z coordinate down. So they're in the same horizontal plane, but they're dropped down.
And they
to a new
never
vertical.
thought of actually saving some of that space and showing some of it, like if they were, when they were enlarging the parking space in front of the Notre Dame in Paris, they found all these old things, and so what, underneath, and so what they did, instead of continuing the parking underneath, is they enlarged the parking on the top, but then underneath, it's kind of like a museum now. You know, they kept all the walls
But
and they
local
put,
people don't really want that stuff shown in general.
oh, I see.
They're not comfortable with it coming out of the ground. That's why the whole critique of the sort of
I
the
see.
head that comes out of the ground and shocks
Right,
the Indian.
right.
The Indian's like shocked, right? He's like,
I was
repulsed.
thinking about pots and things, that obviously not.
But it's also the context of, you know, an ancestral context. I actually worked in France where someone, you know, here a bulldozer accidentally clips a Pueblo site, you know, they'll just go around or just keep going and just not say anything. There, a bulldozer clipped a site, and the whole village came out to protect this little thing. Because there's this definite direct connection between those really are those French people's ancestors, even though it's
Right.
100, 200,000 years old.
Right.
And that doesn't happen here. I mean, it's, you know, oh, these people don't exist anymore, and just blow through. And so it's, that context is really different. So, yeah, that's why we have all these laws to help prevent some of that happening.
In Mexico City, when they find, like, you go through the subway tubes, there's actually temples that have sunken down.
Right.
The surface of Mexico City, Tenochtitlan and Tenochtitlan are the historic islands of Mexico City in the Mesoamerican time. They're Aztec, and they're actually islands in a lake. It's like a marshy lake. And eventually, after the conquest, they drain the lake out and they make the valley of Mexico City, right? But when they come down through the subway channels, they're probably 20, 30, 40 feet below the ground. There's actually places in the subway channels where you literally come into a temple. A whole temple sunk down into the marshy ground. And they'll have like little kind of like, you know,
Caution.
you have caution tape, basically, little barriers, but you're actually in the middle of a rush hour in Mexico City, and it's like, you know, tens of thousands of people are running through the system, and it's like little ants and like a little ant trail, and you kind of move around it, and you come around it, and you stop for a minute, and there's literally like a temple right there. Several times I encountered that in Mexico City. The Pueblo people, you know, contemporary Pueblos aren't comfortable with taking things out of the ground. They're not comfortable with showing things. They're not comfortable necessarily with even receiving the stuff that comes out of the ground in their own community at this point. So it's kind of anathema that they would have a display or some kind of...
So they just would like to.
They like to leave it there. Yeah,
Right.
keep it there. It's actually so interesting that the Tesuque Pueblo, for whatever reason, agreed to the reinterment at a lower level of their historic village. I don't know the details of it, but it's fascinating to me because in general it's just like a, you know, kind of policy of not touching it, just don't touch it. Sometimes people don't know what to do with things like that. You know, it's a pre-existing body of information, and maybe there's kind of a corollary in what's happening now in this time that the information systems don't really exist. Where you see the information back in.
Thanks.
That's